My father was a famous chef throughout the region. He made a roast whole lamb with crispy skin and tender meat that everyone craved. The Regent King's beloved concubine heard about it and summoned him to the palace to cook. She specifically requested the roast lamb, so my father went. When he was thrown out, his entire body was burned and charred. It turned out the concubine had a sudden whim. She wanted a roasted lamb without any lamb flavor. After my mother learned of this, she didn't shed a single tear. Instead, 3 months later, she set up a large cauldron at the palace gate and began selling lamb. In the second month after my father's death, my mother took the remaining family money and went to Old Woman Lu's house at the end of the alley. That Old Woman Lu was a remarkable person. With her skilled hands, she could turn a married woman back into a maiden. But it was said to be extremely painful. Once, a young lady screamed in pain all night and nearly died. But when my mother came back, she didn't cry out in pain, just looked a bit pale. She called me to her and said, "Ning, from now on you must not call me mother anymore. Only call me sister. Do you understand why?" I nodded. I understand. My mother smiled and praised me for being sensible. Then she took me to the capital. We found a rundown old house to settle in. Afterwards, I set up a large pot on the main street in front of the Prince Regent's mansion and started selling lamb soup. My mother's skill with lamb. She learned it from my father. My father was a famous chef for miles around. His specialty was roast whole lamb, also a roasted dish. The roast whole lamb my father made was more flavorful than others. The skin was crispy, the meat tender and rich in flavor, yet without any gamey smell. Even people who normally swore they didn't eat lamb, upon smelling it, couldn't help but eat piece after piece. When my father cooked, my mother helped in the backyard kitchen. Most other shopkeepers' wives greeted customers out front, but my mother never showed herself. I understood why. Because my mother was too beautiful, so beautiful that she easily attracted trouble. And our family were just ordinary, helpless commoners. In this world, we couldn't afford to stir up trouble. We only hoped to stay out of its way. The only time my father made a splash was when the Prince Regent's household heard that his roast whole lamb was unrivaled under heaven and invited him to cook for the prince. My father happily told my mother, "This time the reward will definitely be generous. I'll buy you a few new outfits in the capital and have a pair of pure gold bunnies made for our Aining's dowry." I love bunnies the most. Hearing this, I immediately threw myself into my father's arms, shouting, "Bunnies! I want bunnies!" My father laughed and carried me on his back, running around the room, while my mother chased after us, laughing and trying to stop him. Don't drop the child. Those moments felt like a dream. If I'd known, I would have given up the bunnies. I just wanted my father. My father was tossed out the back gate of the Regent's mansion by the servants. People passed by on the street, but not a single one dared to pick him up, because he was already charred black. His flesh was blackened, blood and pus oozing from the cracked skin. In the end, a kind fellow villager took him away on a cart under the cover of night. That villager wept as he cursed, "It's all Lu Muyao's fault. All of it." Lu Muyao, such a beautiful name. She was the regent's newly taken favorite concubine, the most beautiful woman in the capital. When she heard my father was skilled at roasting lamb, she asked him, "I hear you can make lamb roasted without any trace of gamey smell." My father answered truthfully, "Concubine, rest assured, this lamb will certainly not be gamey." Lu Muyao suddenly stopped smiling. She said, "Then can it be made without any lamb flavor?" My father smiled apologetically. "It's a whole roasted lamb. How can it have no lamb flavor?" Lu Muyao twisted her handkerchief. She said coldly, "Who says it can't? Today I'll cook, making a whole roasted lamb with no lamb flavor at all. How about that?" She ordered someone to gag my father, tied up like a lamb, and set over the fire to roast. The flames blazed. Lu Muyao covered her mouth with her handkerchief and laughed. "Isn't this a whole roasted lamb without any lamb flavor?" Finally, she looked at my father, whose skin was cracked and burned by the roasting fire, with a venomous gaze. I said I would never be a concubine. Even the prince agreed to that. "Who do you think you are, daring to call me concubine?" Lu Muyao hated being called a concubine more than anything. She was an orphan with no parents, brought back from the battlefield by Shaoan. They had lived and died together, trading lives for each other. Their bond was deep. But Xiao An's household already had a legal wife, taken at his parents' command. This wife came from a prestigious aristocratic family, and even though Xiao An had little affection for her, he could never divorce or demote her. Therefore, the only status left for Lu Muyao was that of a concubine. But she refused to accept it. I fought side by side with Engage on the northern frontier battlefield, and we swore to be each other's one and only for life, with the snowy mountains as our witness. Now, they want me to become his concubine?
Absolutely impossible.
She would rather stay by Xiao An's side without any title or recognition. She said to him, "I don't care how the world sees me, as long as you treat me as your only wife." Xiao An was both moved and guilt-ridden. He was touched by Lu Muyao's devoted love. He felt guilty because he had indeed concealed the fact that he was already married. He could only treat her even better. When Lu Muyao casually mentioned she wanted to eat river delicacies, Xiao An immediately sent people 1,000 miles away to the Jiangnan region. They rushed back with fresh fish and shrimp. If she had a headache or fever, Xiao An would skip court and stay at home to keep her company. As for the time she, due to a bad mood, roasted an innocent civilian alive in public. To Xiao An, though it was a bit troublesome, it was still not a major issue. He just let out a sigh. Forget it. Muyao cares most about status, and it's also this outsider's fault for not knowing how to speak. Since no one died, just have the steward give him more silver for his injuries, and be done with it. When my mother heard these words relayed by the fellow villager, she said nothing. She just gently picked up the spoon, trying to feed my father some water, but he could no longer swallow. A light command from those in power to treat the wounds could make it as if nothing had happened. But when 60 to 70% of a person's skin is charred and festering, how can it be treated? Several doctors came to see him, all shaking their heads, saying there was no cure. He could only watch himself rot away and then die. In fact, my father should have passed long ago. The only reason he held on to his last breath was that he had something to say to my mother. Straining to open his mouth, he said with his final strength, "Lan Fu, you must not, do not seek revenge." My mother gently held my father's hand. She said softly, "Don't worry. I wouldn't risk myself. After all, he is the Regent King. Even the Emperor respects him. I'm just an ordinary woman. How many lives do I have to avenge you? From now on, I'll just live well with Aining. After all, the silver you've saved is more than enough." I closed the shop and went spring outings with Aining, admired lotuses in summer, made osmanthus cakes in autumn, and built snowmen in winter. My father was at peace. He closed his eyes peacefully, a tear seeping from the corner. My mother gently wiped it away, so softly, afraid of hurting him. "Have a good sleep. When you wake, I will still be your wife." After saying this, Mother picked up the orchid hairpin father had given her as a token of their love. Closing her eyes, she steadied her hand repeatedly, aimed the hairpin at the already charred throat, and thrust it in. After my father's funeral, in his bundle I found a pair of tiny gold rabbits. I held them tightly to my chest, tears washing away the bloodstains on the little rabbits. I wiped my eyes and said, "Mother, I want to go to the capital." My mother watched the white funeral papers fluttering in the sky, silent for a long time, then whispered, "Of course, we must go to the capital. People say rice is expensive in the capital, making it hard to live. But for my mother and me, it didn't seem so difficult." My mother was skilled with her hands. She set up a pot, and people came smelling the aroma. I worked quickly, helping to attract customers and collect money in front of the stall. "Here's your lamb soup, sir. Enjoy. Come again." The lamb soup was thick and white, sprinkled with green scallions, absolutely delicious. Our business was booming, until one time, just as I lifted a bowl of soup, someone suddenly kicked me hard in the lower back. "Aining," my mother cried out, trying to save me, but the big pot was kicked over in an instant. My mother was knocked down too, and half a pot of scalding lamb soup spilled onto her skirt. Standing before us were the guards of the Regent's mansion, behind a row of sturdy men like iron barrels. A beauty in a goose yellow RU skirt. She frowned, her face full of displeasure. "Smash their stall for me."
Yes.
As the guards were about to charge, I rushed to protect the pot and screamed shrilly, "Help! Help!" A guard reached out, and I bit him hard. He bellowed in pain and raised his hand to hit me. In the chaos, a cool, clear voice said, "What's going on here?" The crowd that had gathered stepped aside to make way. A man in a dark ink blue robe stepped forward. He was not dressed luxuriously and had only one attendant, but the servants, upon seeing him, immediately all knelt down. "Greetings, your highness," the Prince Regent. Xiao En, the current emperor's uncle, stepped forward. His expression was somewhat displeased. In broad daylight, in the capital, you make it seem like a scene of murder and arson. What kind of behavior is this? Lu Muiao stepped forward immediately, linked arms with Xiao En, pouted aggrievedly. "Brother, and you know, I can't stand the smell of mutton." I originally wanted to discuss with them if they could move farther away, but that scoundrel came up and bit me, so my men accidentally knocked over the soup pot. That servant immediately raised his hand, covered in blood from the bite, to testify for Lu Muiao. Xiao En sighed. "All right, then have someone help them move their stall." "Yes." Immediately, 2 servants stepped forward to pull my mother. My mother struggled to stand, but fell back down, her skirts spreading around her, exposing a pair of scalded red calves, and in the struggle, the veil hat fell off her head, revealing her face. People say even in plain clothes and humble ornaments, she could not hide her stunning beauty. For a moment, the 2 servants pulling her froze, and even Xiao En was slightly startled, let alone the beauty with tears in her eyes, adding 3 parts more of pitiable charm. My mother held back tears, slowly rose, and kowtowed to Xiao En. "Offending the noble, this humble woman deserves 10,000 deaths. I will move far away and never appear before the noble again." With that, my mother struggled to rise with my support, to steady the heavy cauldron. Her legs had just been scalded, and the pot was heavy, so my mother staggered, looking particularly pitiful. For a moment, I noticed Xiao and instinctively reached out to help my mother, but he quickly withdrew his hand. This scene also fell into Lu Muiao's eyes. Standing behind Xiao En, her venomous gaze fixed on us. Mother took me and moved to West Street, rented a shop front as a temporary shelter. This place was remote, with few customers, and we could barely earn any money. I went to the surrounding mountains to gather medicinal herbs. I wanted to apply it to my mother to ease her pain, but she kissed my forehead and threw the herbs into the brazier. "Can't apply it." I understood her meaning, but couldn't help my eyes reddening. My father cherished my mother the most. If she scraped her skin, even a little, he would make a fuss. Seeing her burned like this, how heartbroken he would be. But my mother looked at her injured leg and said softly, "This is probably not even 1/10,000th of the pain he felt then." Before she finished, sounds of pots and pans clattering came from the front hall. I ran to the front hall and saw Lu Muiao. She had brought over a dozen maids and matrons. Those matrons overturned the tables and chairs we had painstakingly obtained, smashing kitchenware all over the floor. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I rushed forward to stop them, but couldn't. Lu Muiao, cracking melon seeds, said, "Where is that slut who seduced the prince?" My mother was dragged out from the back courtyard. Her injuries hadn't healed, and she could barely walk. Her 2 burned calves scraped along the rough ground, and her skirt quickly turned red. Lu Muiao ordered her men to throw her on the ground, then stepped forward, pinching my mother's face with her sharp nails and spitting melon seed shells onto her face. "You bitch, do you think I can't see it? Relying on your meager looks, you put on that pitiful act in front of the prince. If I don't teach you a lesson today, I'm afraid you'll never give up on your scheme to climb into his bed." 2 maids pressed my mother down on either side. Lu Muiao pulled out her gold hairpin and was about to scratch my mother's face. "No." I threw myself forward, shielding my mother with my body, and screamed with all my might, "Noble one, please. I beg you. My sister has never done anything wrong. Please, if you must kill someone, kill me instead. Don't kill my sister." Lu Muiao was furious. Just as the gold hairpin was about to pierce my body, a plate flew over and struck it. The plate shattered, and the hairpin flew out of Lu Muiao's hand. She covered her wrist with a soft cry. My mother held me tightly in her arms. When I looked up again, I found a tall, graceful figure standing at the doorway. It was Xiao En. In the dim light, his face was pale as iron. The porcelain shards stung Lu Muiao's skin. She covered her wrist, eyes wide open. "Brother and you." Her disbelief instantly turned into towering rage. She pointed at my mother. "You dared to lay a hand on me for this lowly wench?"
"Why?"
"Just because she has a face that attracts men?" Lu Muiao went mad. rushing forward to tear at my mother's face. Shaoan strode over quickly. He grabbed Lu Muyao's wrist. "How long are you going to keep up this ruckus?" he hissed. "If I don't stop you, you'll only cause a huge disaster." They quarreled fiercely. In the end, Xiao En's face turned pale with anger. He blurted out, "All the women in the capital combined don't have half of your jealousy and ferocity." Lu Muyao was stunned. Her eyes rimmed red instantly, and big tears fell.
Fine.
"All the women under heaven are less jealous than I am." Lu Muyao smiled bitterly. "But besides me, who would have carried you, step by step, out of the snowy mountain when you were gravely wounded? Who would have cut into their own flesh and used their blood as medicine to heal you? Who would rather die to protect you? Now it seems I'd be better off dead in Saibei. At least then you'd remember me forever, rather than this." Enduring the humiliation from a lowly woman, Lu Muyao shot a fierce glare at my mother, then took off the lover's lock from her neck, threw it to the ground, turned around and ran off. The maids and old servants knelt in terror, and the boldest among them picked up the lover's lock, raised it over her head, and said, "Your Highness, Miss Muyao grew up in Saibei, and is not as well-mannered as the ladies in the capital, but her devotion to you is genuine. If a girl's heart is shattered, it will be hard to mend afterward. Indeed, Your Highness, please go after Miss Muyao. She is unfamiliar with the people and places here, running about in the capital. What if she encounters danger?" Shaoan picked up the lover's lock, then turned his head to look at my mother. My mother knelt on the ground, her head lowered. From Xiao An's angle, he could only see a pale stretch of her neck. She clearly sensed his gaze, but did not raise her head to meet his eyes. Shaoan closed his eyes, and in the end, still holding that lock of harmony, he went after Lu Muyao. After that, I didn't see Shaoan for many days. Only the gossip outside the shop brought in new bits of news. Shaoan had coaxed Lu Muyao back. They had made up. On Lu Muyao's birthday, Shaoan bought an entire shop full of jade as a gift. He had someone release 1,000 colored lanterns at the Lantern Festival just to win a smile from Lu Muyao. People marveled at Xiao En's lavish affection for Lu Muyao while mocking my mother. How delusional she was, flaunting that bewitching face of hers before the Prince Regent. What else could it be but seduction? As soon as Miss Muyao frees up a hand, she'll come deal with her. TSK. I hear that Miss Muyao's methods are especially ruthless. That vixen might not last many more days. No wonder they talk like that, the last one who tried to seduce the Prince Regent like this. There was an ink-grinding maid in the study. She merely tucked a few flowers at her temples and smiled a little too much at the Prince Regent. The next day, her body was found in the well. Her face was covered in gashes. The women who came between Shaoan and Lu Muyao always met such a gruesome end. It was late at night and I was frightened. I reached for my mother's hand. Her hand was cold, yet her smile was gentle. Mother kissed my forehead. "A Ning, remember this. Most people in this world are far from the truth, so their words are not worth heeding. We just need to focus on our own business." After Lu Muyao caused a scene, there was hardly any business left in the shop. But my mother still diligently wiped the tables and chairs every day and prepared the ingredients. Finally, on an extremely quiet night, a horse appeared at the end of the alley. It was Shaoan. He came alone, pushed open the creaking wooden door, and asked, "Closed for the night?" My mother walked out from the backyard. Shaoan looked at her, and she looked at him. Moonlight seeped in through the window lattice. Their gazes met. It felt both brief and endless. After that moment, my mother stepped aside and said softly, "Please come in, sir." Lu Muyao might never know that before she led her people to overturn the stall in front of the prince's mansion, Shaoan had once been a regular customer of my mother's. After drilling troops at Daliu camp, he would return, exhausted, under the cover of night, and my mother would have already prepared a bowl of hot, savory lamb soup. A steaming bowl was the only comfort in the deep night. Shaoan would always eat a bowl before going back to sleep. He wore ordinary clothes, claiming to be a soldier on night duty at the prince's mansion, and we pretended not to know his true identity. Those were wonderful days, when Shaoan wasn't the all-powerful Regent King, but just a hungry soldier, eating something at a stall run by two sisters, making small talk. Back then, my mother hadn't yet had her veil torn off by Lu Muyao. Shaoan couldn't see her face, but he could smell her soft, sweet scent, like spring flowers. My mother's personality was as warm and bright as a flower. She would leave a light on for Xiao, and when he returned late at night, care about the scar on his hand from the cold and even tease him, asking, "Young master, do you have a sweetheart?" Xiaoan would smile without speaking, but the tips of his ears would turn a little red. Now, such good times are gone forever. I carefully set the dishes on the table. They were still the dishes Xiaoan loved most, but the atmosphere was completely different. My mother no longer laughed or teased. She stood with her head bowed in a far corner, as if she didn't dare to look at Xiaoan. In the moonlight, the injury Lu Muyao had inflicted on her face was still visible. Xiao invisibly grew distressed. He set down his chopsticks several times, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. Finally, he managed to find a topic. "Where's the apricot blossom wine?" The apricot blossom wine. It was something my mother had brewed especially for Xiao, and just because he had once mentioned that he loved the scent of apricot blossoms. Every time she served that wine to Xiao, I would pout unhappily and say, "Big brother, my sister is so hopelessly clumsy. This wine, no matter how much other customers offered, she wouldn't sell. She missed out on a lot of money." Xiaoan looked up at my mother, but she shyly turned away. At that moment, Xiaoan looked up at my mother again, but this time she didn't turn away. She just stood there quietly, looking out the window. Xiaoan followed her gaze. Outside the window, the heavy rain had just passed. The tree trunks were bare, and the apricot blossoms had fallen. After that, Xiaoan never came again. From time to time, the sound of galloping horses could be heard from the street outside. It was Xiaoan leading his personal guards to the Great Willow Camp. He passed by here every day, but never came in to see us. Every day, Mother and I would get up before dawn to light the fire and cook. But often, until closing time, no customers came. Things seemed to be getting worse and worse. Not only were there no customers, but also a few loafers and old women would squat at the door, shouting filthy insults at my mother. They said my mother was always clinging to noblemen, desperate to climb into the beds of princes and dukes. They also said my mother looked like an unmarried maiden, but behind the scenes she had secretly slept with countless men, a worn-out shoe used and discarded by many young masters. I rushed out and hit them with a fire poker. They weren't afraid. They laughed and teased me, pinching and kicking me, until the sound of military boots echoed on the bluestone path. I turned around and saw Xiaoan in black. The night dew was heavy, and his forehead hair was slightly damp. Clearly, he had been standing in the shadows for a while. I, who had been gritting my teeth and staying silent, burst into loud sobs the moment I saw Xiaoan. Xiaoan ordered his soldiers to take away those loafers and old women, and at the same time picked me up. "Where's your elder sister?" I sobbed. "Elder sister has been locking herself in her room and won't come out." I called her, but she ignored me. The door was locked, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't open it. Xiaoan's face instantly changed. He carried me and rushed into the backyard. He kicked open the door to the side room, and immediately a piercing scream rang out from inside. "Elder sister." My mother had hanged herself from the beam. Xiaoan cut the white silk with one slash of his blade. He carried her down. She had her eyes closed, her face extremely pale, like a snow figurine on the verge of melting away. I cried myself hoarse. "Sister, sister, please don't die. I only have you, only you." Xiaoan was holding my mother. He kept calling her, Lan Fu, wake up." That was my mother's name. Back then, when Xiaoan first came to our food stall to patronize our business, my mother had deliberately left behind a handkerchief, embroidered with her name and a lifelike orchid. Xiaoan did not pick it up at the time. He let it remain on the ground. Now it seems that although the handkerchief was not picked up, it stayed in his heart. The battle of wits, how long and arduous it was. Step by step, we have come this far. Now, at last, the most critical moment has arrived. Amid Xiaoan's incessant calls, my mother finally struggled to open her eyes. The moment she saw it was Xiaoan, she closed her eyes, and a single tear slid down. The prince should not have come. Xiaoan suddenly grew angry. "I indeed should not have come, since coming only means seeing your cold face." He closed his eyes, veins bulging on his forehead. "Why, Shenlan Fu, you had so many chances to ask me for help, yet you never said a word. You knew those gossiping people were sent by Lu Muyao, and you also knew I was always watching over you in secret.
But you wouldn't even look at me.
Is it because I deceived you back then, that even if it meant death, you refused to beg me for a single word? After Shaoan said this, he panted slightly. I had never seen him so agitated. My mother quietly waited for him to vent, then lowered her head and spoke softly. Are you finished, Your Highness? If so, please leave. She didn't finish that sentence, because Shaoan sealed her lips with a kiss. Between their entwined lips and teeth, he said through gritted teeth, Shen Lanfu, try driving me away again. The fragrant mist curled around the gauze curtains, while I sat in the courtyard, splitting charcoal pieces one by one. I threw them into the incense burner. The scent was truly wonderful, exactly like the one on my mother. Shaoan didn't come out until dawn. I had already fed and groomed his horse, and wiped his blade clean. As I handed the sword to him, I kept my head lowered. He crouched down and asked me, Why are you crying? I held back tears and said, I'm so happy for Mother, but also so afraid for her. My crying face must have looked utterly pitiful. Shaoan's expression softened. He crouched down and patted my head. From now on, I'll protect you both. Ning, there's nothing you need to fear. The day my mother was brought into the prince's residence, Lu Muyao flew into a terrible rage. She grabbed a sword, intent on killing my mother, but then she suddenly saw at the courtyard gate a row of people kneeling. They were the loafers and gossiping hags Lu Muyao had sent to humiliate and curse my mother. At that moment, each of them had their tongues ripped out, letting out muffled, blood-curdling screams. The sight was so horrific that Lu Muyao fainted on the spot. When she woke up, she smashed every piece of porcelain in the room and shrieked, Bitch! One day, you'll get your retribution. But the people in the residence no longer trembled before her as before, because everyone knew that the prince's most beloved woman had already shifted from Lu Muyao to Shen Lanfu. Yet Shen Lanfu was not reckless like Lu Muyao. On the contrary, she was gentle and decorous. On the second day after entering the mansion, we went to pay respects to the princess consort. Princess consort Cui was sitting in the Buddhist hall, dressed in plain clothes, tapping a wooden fish. When she heard my mother enter, she merely said indifferently, I never thought anyone in this manner would still remember me. Cui had been neglected in this residence for a long time. Shaoan did not favor her, and Lu Muyao bullied her. Even the servants dared to look down on her. She even lost a child because of Lu Muyao's scheming. Shaoan only said, Muyao, didn't mean it. The difference between love and indifference was so clear that from then on, Cui retreated to the Buddhist hall. Her heart turned to ashes. No one remembered this powerless mistress anymore. Throughout the manor, only Lu Muyao was respected. But at this moment, my mother presented a teacup and said softly, Your servant will always remember Your Highness. She nudged me and said, Aining, you received the gift but haven't thanked the princess consort yet. I held out the pair of little gold rabbits. On their bases was a small character, Cui. I said, Aining thanks Your Highness. Madame Cui's hands began to tremble. In those eyes, ever as calm as a still lake, stormy waves surged. She remembered. In that devastating calamity, Madame Cui was the only one in the entire prince's residence who helped my father. After converting to Buddhism, she had been a vegetarian. Thus, she did not attend the roasted lamb feast. By the time she saw the towering flames and rushed over, my father had already been strung up on the fire, burned beyond recognition. Madame Cui had long retreated from the world, determined not to argue with Lu Muyao again. But that day, she still pointed at Lu Muyao and flew into a rage. Trampling on human lives, causing great suffering. Aren't you afraid of going to hell? Lu Muyao grinned at Madame Cui. Oh, didn't you make up your mind to ignore worldly affairs, sister? Why come out and throw such a tantrum? Could it be that living in the Buddha hall hasn't purified your heart? Is the man roasting over the fire your secret lover? She said this, but in the end, Lu Muyao still waved her hand.
Boring.
The lamb isn't well roasted. Let's stop. Throw it out. Madame Cui knew she should not have meddled. Shaoan was far too partial to Lu Muyao. If she displeased Lu Muyao, she would be the one to suffer in the end. But in the end, she couldn't bear to. She sent someone to inform my father's fellow townsmen while opening my father's bundle. Inside was a list noting a pair of little gold rabbits to buy for Aining. That's right. The little gold rabbits in the bundle were not bought by my father. He hadn't had time then. It was Chui who, upon seeing that list, suddenly burst into tears. Then she returned to her boudoir and took out a pair of little gold rabbits from her own dowry, those left to her by her father, who had passed away many years ago. She placed that pair of little rabbits into my father's bundle, helping a father send his final gift to his daughter.
Just like that.
A timid wife forced into the Buddhist hall, and a lowly concubine drifting like duckweed quietly gazed at each other in the sunlight. The tenon and mortise of fate finally clicked into perfect place at this moment. My mother bowed deeply. Your Highness, you helped this concubine once. I dare to ask your Highness to help me once more. Hatred is, in truth, the most intense emotion in this world. Hatred lasts far longer than love, but it often lurks beneath deep waters, silent and undetectable. People only knew that this princely mansion had become quiet. Shaoan came to my mother's room every night, and she would prepare a steaming bowl of mutton soup to soothe his exhaustion from the day. Chui Shi still chanted sutras in the Buddhist hall, remaining the forgotten princess consort. As for Lu Muyao, she too had become unusually calm, no longer crying, no longer throwing tantrums, no longer vying with my mother for favor. But my mother and I knew that her hatred had grown deep as well, flowing beneath the still waters, bound to erupt one day. Sure enough, on an extremely calm night, my mother prepared the mutton soup as usual, waiting for Shaoan, but he never came. She waited until dawn. Finally, the courtyard gate made a sound, but it was Lu Muyao's maid. She looked at my mother, her eyebrows nearly flying upward. Concubine Shun, come with me. My mother was shoved to her knees before Lu Muyao by someone all the way. I tried to save her, but two servants grabbed my arms, one on each side, and pinned me down in the hall. Your Highness. I cried out to the hall. Why is this? Didn't you promise to protect us? Before the words even left my mouth, a slap landed on my face. Lu Muyao flexed her wrist and sneered. You little wretch, your sister did such a shameful thing. And you still have the nerve to call on the prince? I looked at Xiao and through tear-filled eyes. He was propping his head up, seated at the highest spot, his gaze lowered. He wouldn't look at me, nor at my mother. His expression was grim beyond words. My mother's face grew pale inch by inch. She couldn't even stand, struggling only to say, Miss Muyao, Aining is still young. If you have anything to say, you can say it to me. Lu Muyao laughed.
No, Heri.
It'll be your turn soon enough. Once the witness comes up, you can speak all you want. She waved her hand. Bring them in. Two maids helped an old grandmother walk up. She must have been around 80 years old, with hair as white as snow, her hands covered in wrinkled skin, her eyes vacant and clouded. The moment my mother saw her, her face turned deathly pale. Lu Muyao looked at my mother's face and laughed loudly. Well, do you recognize her? Both my mother and I know her. This old woman is Granny Lu from the end of the alley. Lady Lu, if you have something to say it plainly. Why bring such a senile old woman here? It was Chui Shi who asked, as the matter involved the inner chambers. She had also come today. Lu Muyao had always detested Chui Shi. Seeing her ask the question, she sneered coldly. This Granny Lu suffered a stroke earlier this year. Her mind is indeed not very clear now, but before that, she was a renowned witch doctor in the Central Plains. She knew how to refine poisons and use curses. And the best part is, she could turn a married woman back into a virgin. With every word she spoke, my mother's face grew paler. As if savoring my mother's pain, Lu Muyao stared at her face and finally gave a brilliant smile. Concubine Lon, you've been treated by Granny Lu too, haven't you? Shaoan stared at my mother's face. My mother lowered her head. This concubine says no. Would your Highness believe that? Stop putting on that pitiful act. Lu Muyao said sharply. It doesn't matter if you don't admit it. Let Granny Lu come and identify her herself. Lu Muyao pulled Granny Lu over and pointed at my mother's face, saying, Take a good look. Has this woman ever come to visit you? Granny Lu's murky eyes fixed on my mother. She looked for a long time, then slowly nodded. The sound of a teacup shattering, Shaoan had accidentally dropped the cup in his hand. Shards flew, and one cut Shaoan's hand, blood dripping down. But he seemed to feel no pain. Shaoan stood up and walked away step by step, without ever glancing at my mother again. Lu Muyao smiled. She bent down and spat on my mother's face. Bitch, daring to seduce the prince? This is your fate. My mother and I were locked in the backyard woodshed. It was said that at dawn, the clan elders would come, stuff my mother into a pig cage, and drown her in the pond. Shaoan stayed in Lu Muyao's courtyard. It was said he had a headache attack. Lu Muyao was holding a medicinal ointment, carefully massaging him. The woodshed was so cold. Outside, a big black dog kept barking. I was a bit afraid of dogs, so I curled up in mother's arms, trembling slightly. She stroked my head. "My aning has suffered injustice," she said, kissing the top of my head and humming a nursery rhyme. The little piggy ate its fill, closed its eyes, and slept still. Big ears flapping, little tail wagging. When I was very small, father always sang this song to coax me to sleep. I really did fall asleep. When I woke up again, the woodshed door was open, and Shaoan stood outside, alone. He said, "You can go." Long afterward, I would wonder, did mother's heart stir in that moment? Shaoan, the Prince Regent renowned for his suspicion, cold-bloodedness, and cruelty, in the knowledge that he had been deceived, was still willing to secretly let her go. This was a love that would move countless women. But I never got the chance to ask, because before mother could reply to Shaoan, sounds came from the distance. "Your Highness, Your Highness." Something has changed. The one who came was a maid in plain clothes, who was part of Chui's dowry. The princess kept Granny Lu in the courtyard for a night, and then she felt something was off. Lu Muyao was too confident of victory, so after finishing her interrogation in the hall, she directly kicked Granny Lu out of the prince's mansion. Chui, who had been a devout vegetarian for years, couldn't bear to see a demented old woman left to wander the streets. So she sent someone to bring her into her side courtyard and even had the physician who came to check on her pulse examine Granny Lu. After the examination, the physician's expression turned strange, and he said, "I feel that this old woman is not truly demented, but rather drugged." Chui immediately sensed something was wrong and hurriedly sent someone to find Shaoan. The imperial physician conducted a private examination in the room. After inducing vomiting, acupuncture, and herbal treatments, Granny Lu regained consciousness. She looked around in a daze. At that moment, Chui pointed at my mother and asked Granny Lu, "Have you seen this woman before?" Granny Lu nodded, just as Shaoan's face darkened again. Granny Lu said she had seen it in the portrait that concubine Lu gave me. She made me look at it repeatedly, then forced me to drink a bowl of medicine. When I woke up again, I was already here. As Shaoan carried my mother out of the side room, Lu Muyao rushed out of her courtyard, ignoring the guards' attempts to stop her. With disheveled hair, she charged at Shaoan, grabbing at the hem of his robe. "Engage, I really didn't drug that Granny Lu. I really didn't." Shaoan no longer listened to her protests. With ample evidence and witnesses, all the neighbors around Granny Lu's house testified that Lu Muyao led people to break into Granny Lu's home. They forcibly forced Granny Lu to drink the medicine. Also, Chui's men had searched Lu Muyao's room and found the portrait of my mother. So no matter how Lu Muyao cried and claimed she was wronged, Shaoan no longer believed her. He just glanced at Lu Muyao with disgust, threw her onto the muddy ground after the rain. I watched her wailing and screaming. Then I quietly climbed over the wall and went to the back door of the prince's mansion. Granny Lu was waiting there for me. I stuffed a large pouch of gold into her arms. "Thank you, Granny," I whispered softly. "And please thank the neighbors for me and my mother." Granny Lu didn't take the gold from my hand. Instead, she patted my head. Sniffling, she said, "Every time I lose my appetite, I truly crave that mutton your father used to make." Lu Muyao was confined to her room, crying and making a scene, begging to see Shaoan, but he refused to meet her. He spent all his days in my mother's courtyard. When the first autumn rain fell, Lu Muyao fell ill. She was gravely sick. She had old wounds, sustained for Shaoan's sake back on the battlefield in the northern frontier. She had taken an arrow for him, the arrowhead laced with poison. Though they had sucked out the blood in an emergency, residual toxins remained in her body. Now, perhaps due to days of pent-up sorrow or the cold weather, the old injury flared up. Lu Muyao was unconscious. Her personal maid knelt in the corridor, pleading heart-wrenchingly with Shaoan, "Your Highness, go see Lady Muyao for the last time. I fear she won't make it." Along with this request came. It was a mottled double happiness lock, with bloodstains that couldn't be washed off, testament to the years when the two had relied on each other through life and death. Truly unforgettable, after all. Shaoan clutched the lock tightly, then said to my mother, "I'll go see Mu Yao." My mother obediently nodded and said okay. Shaoan entered Lu Mu Yao's courtyard. Also summoned were all the imperial physicians of the entire imperial hospital. When she threw her tantrum, he had loathed her. Now she was dying. He couldn't bear to let her go after all. Countless rare medicinal ingredients were poured into her. 3 days later, Lu Mu Yao finally woke from her coma. And the first thing she did upon waking was to hug Shaoan and cry out loud. "And Gidge, I don't want a lifetime of only us two anymore. I was too greedy. I shouldn't have acted that way. I only beg you not to abandon me, not to cast me away." In the study, Madame Cui warmed some hot tea, handed it to Shaoan, and said, "My father has a residence in Jiangnan and a well-acquainted imperial physician lives nearby. How about letting Mu Yao go there to recuperate?" Shaoan rubbed his brow. He hesitated. Cui Shi said softly, "I know the prince still has feelings for Mu Yao, but the imperial physician said she cannot get angry while recovering. And you know Mu Yao's temper as well. If she stays in the residence and sees concubine lawn again, what then? Besides, concubine land's belly grows bigger every day." Cui Shi was not wrong. When Lu Mu Yao was at her worst, my mother was diagnosed with pregnancy. For the child to be born safely, and also to prevent Lu Mu Yao from further harming herself with anger, Shaoan ultimately agreed. Lu Mu Yao did not want to leave. She wept bitterly and begged to see Shaoan. "And gee, I want to stay by your side. I won't go anywhere." Shaoan coaxed her gently, "Yaoer, once you recover, I will come to bring you back." Lu Mu Yao had no choice. She cried until she was dizzy and dazed, and was put on a carriage heading south. Time passed quickly. At first, Shaoan missed Lu Mu Yao and frequently asked Cui Shi about her condition. Later, his inquiries gradually became less frequent. His heart was entirely set on my mother. In truth, she was gradually growing older, fine lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, her radiance slowly fading. Yet she still cooked a wonderful meal. Shaoan still loved the mutton soup she made most of all. If he went a few days without it, he would miss it dearly. When my mother brought him the mutton soup again, he stroked my mother's hair and sighed softly. "Lanfu, you have white hair now." My mother just smiled and said nothing. In truth, she had long had white hair. The night my father died, her hair turned white overnight. The jet black hair Shaoan saw on her was all dyed with ebony paste. As my mother's pregnancy advanced, the imperial physician said she should no longer share a bed with Shaoan. In the long, silent nights, Shaoan's gaze fell upon me. I was already 13, gradually unfolding like a budding branch, shedding my childhood appearance, entering the prime of youth. Shaoan often came to my mother's courtyard. He would first bring up the story of a Huang and Nuying, then mention the elder and younger Queen Zhou. The implication was nothing more than sisters sharing one husband. My mother still smiled so meekly, saying she was afraid she didn't have such good fortune. Shaoan pulled her into his arms.
How could that be?
"You and Aining are both blessed people." He didn't understand. My mother said the one without good fortune was clearly him. She was going to kill him. That winter, Shaoan fell ill. The illness struck violently. Madame Cui led the womenfolk to take turns attending to him. At first, they thought it wasn't serious. Who would have thought that within just half a month, his condition grew worse and worse? Several women were cursed out by Shaoan while attending him, and they bore injuries on their bodies. Everyone could see that Shaoan had grown suspicious, falling so ill for no reason. If not for the weather being unkind, there was only one possibility: someone close to him was harming him. On the day the heavy snow first cleared, Shaoan ordered my mother and me to attend to him. He said that these days he had been drinking medicine until his mouth had no taste, and he wanted to taste the lamb soup my mother used to make. My mother made the soup and brought it to Shaoan, but he didn't drink it. Instead, he smiled and looked at me. "Aining, come here and drink this soup." My mother paused. "What is this, Prince?" Shaoan didn't speak. He said softly, "Lanfu, why is it that the soup you make always has a strange fragrance?" My mother said, "Because there is this concubine's blood in it." Shaoan raised his eyes slightly, scrutinizing my mother. Ill, he looked much more gloomy than before. He looked at my mother. "Your blood? But there isn't even a wound on your body." My mother didn't answer again. She only said softly, "If the prince has doubts, this concubine is willing to drink first." She raised the bowl to drink, but Shaoan stopped her hand. "Let Aining drink," he said softly. "Lan Fu, I know you love Aining the most." I walked over and picked up the bowl. I drank it all in one go. It was truly delicious. The milky white, richly fragrant soup flowed through me, and the intense pleasure almost made me tremble. Watching me drink it down to the last drop, Xiao An's gaze softened a little. Perhaps because of his illness, his thoughts drifted far away, all the way to the northern frontier. "Mu Yao, how is she?" "I originally planned to bring her back after you gave birth, but now I'm ill too." My mother didn't respond. She put away the bowl. She said, "Does the prince want to drink more lamb soup tomorrow?" "No," Shaoan said wearily. "Very well," my mother said. "After all, on Miss Mu Yao's body, there isn't much good flesh left either." The room became deathly quiet. Xiao and turned to look at my mother. "What did you say?" he exclaimed. My mother laughed. "I told you, Your Highness," she said. "The rich aroma in this soup is my blood." She raised her wrist. It was smooth as jade, with no scars. "Other than me, which concubine does Your Highness have?" Xiao An's eyes flew wide open. He tried to get up, but halfway up he fell back. "You killed her. You and Chui conspired to kill her." It must be said, Xiao An was clever. Even as sick as this, he still reacted instantly. He pounded the bed hard.
Why?
Mu Yao didn't deserve to die. He doesn't remember them. He only knows that Lu Mu Yao scalded my mother's leg, drugged Granny Lu to frame my mother, and caused Chui's miscarriage. The loss of a child. In his eyes, it was just inner court jealous bickering. None of it was a mortal hatred worth killing over. As for the others, those who died because of Lu Mu Yao, in Xiao An's world they were mere ants. He simply didn't remember them. My mother rubbed her forehead and said, "Aining, I'm tired. You talk to the king." "All right, mother." Xiao An's eyes widened as he stared at me, as if he'd seen a ghost. "What did you call her?" I told Xiao An a story. I said to him, "You liked my mother's beauty, but others didn't. My father wasn't one of them. Because in the year my father met my mother, she wasn't beautiful at all. In a crowd of refugees, she was as thin as a bean sprout, her hair disheveled, only a pair of bright eyes showing. Someone snatched her steamed bun. She pounced on them but didn't get it back, so she bit them with her teeth. She bit her own mouth full of blood. My father beat that person for my mother, then broke off half of his own flatbread and gave it to her. My mother wolfed it down. Then she said she was still hungry. My father had no choice but to give her the remaining half. My mother finished that too, and became very embarrassed. She lowered her head and said she was still hungry. My father said nothing. My mother thought this teenage boy must be annoyed, and would abandon her. Just as my mother was slowly walking to squat by the wall, my father ran back and said, "It's all here." He handed his bag of dry rations to my mother and said, "Wait for me. In the future, I'll bring you the most delicious things in the world to eat." He kept that promise. Over the following dozen or so years, he learned all the world's cuisines and made dish after dish for her. They had a daughter and their own small shop. Their future could have been so happy and perfect until the Prince Regent in the distant capital heard of his skills. He was ordered to roast lamb. I went to the cellar and brought Lu Mu Yao out. She and Xiao An had sworn an oath before the snowy mountains, vowing to be together for life as a pair. They deserved to die together. Lu Mu Yao, with her last breath, cursed me. "Little bitch, I know who you are. You look exactly like that damned commoner who deserved to be burned to death. When I tell the prince..." She froze because she saw Xiao An tied up by his limbs, propped up on a pile of wood. "Here, the first sheep." I pointed at him, then looked into Lu Mu Yao's eyes, savoring the terror surging like stormy waves in her gaze. "You, the second." In the second month after Xiao An and Lu Mu Yao's deaths, my mother gave birth to a child. She handed the child to Chui. Chui had always wanted a child, but because of Lu Mu Yao, she could never have one of her own. Chui held the swaddled infant, shedding tears of joy. She asked my mother, "Where are you going?" My mother smiled, took off her fine clothes, and changed into coarse linen. "To the place I belong." Granny Lu at the end of the alley and all the neighbors discovered that the little shop had reopened. The aroma spread far and wide, warmth filling every guest's heart. Many years later, a famine struck near the capital, and many refugees flooded into the city. The wealthy lady set up porridge stalls to feed the refugees. My mother was among them. She had aged and was no longer beautiful, but she was all smiles, like a kind and benevolent goddess. A young boy came to ask for porridge, always asking for bowl after bowl. The other refugees grew upset. They were about to hit him, but my mother quickly stopped them with her people. She asked the boy, "Aren't you full?" The boy shyly shook his head. He pointed at a haystack in the distance, where a little girl was peeking out. "She always says she's hungry," the boy said sheepishly. After drinking one bowl, she says she's still hungry. After another bowl, she's still hungry. Years later, my mother's eyes reddened. She wiped her eyes and said, "It's enough. There's enough for everyone. Aining, take some people to Lady Chui's place and bring 20 bags of rice." I directed the carriage to bring more rice, and the refugees all had enough porridge. The little boy brought a big bowl to the little girl, watching her drink it. "Still hungry?" "No, I'm full."
Good.
The little boy patted his chest. "Wait, from now on, I'll bring you all the best things to eat in the world." The end.